Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Susan Ilian. We begin with news coming out of the United Nations Children's Fund, which says Gaza has now been designated as the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. According to UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell, more than 5,300 Palestinian children have reportedly been killed since October 7th amid conflicts with Israel. Israel has focused its retaliation against Hamas in Gaza, a territory of 2.3 million people. Ms. Russell added in her words, "No place is safe in the Gaza Strip."
Today, the Gaza Strip is the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. No place is safe in the Gaza Strip, and the proposed zones do not have the infrastructure or protection measures in place to meet the needs of such large numbers of civilians. We are particularly concerned by reports of increasing numbers of displaced children who have been separated from their families along evacuation corridors to the south, or who are otherwise arriving unaccompanied to hospitals for medical care. These children are especially vulnerable, and they urgently need to be identified, provided with temporary care, and given access to family tracing and reunification services.
We're learning that Qatar, which has been mediating between Israel and Hamas, has just announced the temporary ceasefire in Gaza will start on Friday morning. Spokesperson for the Qatari Foreign Ministry, Majid Al-Ansari, says 13 hostages taken by Hamas will be released on approximately 4 p.m. He said Qatar's aim is for this deal to end with a lasting truce. Earlier, the Israel National Security Council has said no hostages will be released before Friday, as the expectation had been that the first releases would take place as early as Thursday. Israel's cabinet approved a deal early Wednesday for the release of hostages seized by Hamas in exchange for a 4-day truce in Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel's chief military spokesperson is reiterating that the war in Gaza will continue until the ceasefire brokered between Hamas and the Israeli government. Speaking at a briefing, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said the army does not know when the shooting will stop. Under Wednesday's temporary ceasefire deal, Israel and Hamas agreed to a 4-day pause in fighting to allow the release of 50 hostages held in Gaza in exchange for 150 Palestinians imprisoned in Israel and the entry of humanitarian aid into the enclave. Israel says the ceasefire could be extended further if more hostages are freed. And a Palestinian source corroborates, saying as many as 100 hostages in total could be released by the end of the month. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu indicated during a briefing that the Red Cross would be allowed to visit the remaining hostages in Gaza. Various Gazans are expressing mistrust of the planned truce between Israel and Hamas, sitting on the rubble in a neighborhood in Deir al-Balah with wide-scale damage all around. Ibtisam al-Ajla says she thinks this is a fake truce. Likewise, Omo al-Jabali says she wants a complete ceasefire to have one night's peaceful sleep. The first truce in a near 7-week-old war, reached after mediation by Qatar, is being hailed around the world as a sign of progress that could ease the suffering of civilians in Israeli-besieged Gaza and bring more Israeli captives home. Israeli relatives of victims of Palestinian militant attacks have appealed to the Supreme Court in Jerusalem against the release of Palestinian prisoners as part of a deal between Israel and Hamas. The Almagor Terror Victims Association, a group founded in 1986 and representing the families of Israelis killed in Palestinian attacks, petitioned in demand from the government to cancel the deal and stop the prisoners' release, which was originally expected to take place on Thursday. The court is expected to strike down the appeal based on previous cases. Israel's army is claiming the possession of the headquarters of a Hamas brigade in northern Gaza. A video released on Wednesday shows weapons caches, a workshop, a 7-meter wide tunnel, and shafts in the ground, said to be used for rockets in the Sheikh Zayed city area. Soldiers also identified weapons in a vehicle that was, in their words, apparently used by Hamas in the October 7 attack on Israel. International affairs analyst Yinka Oyeniji joins us now for more. Yinka, the proposed truce between Israel and Hamas was delayed, with the release of hostages set for at least Friday. What do you think caused the delay, and do you see this deal actually happening?
So the first thing is, it's not a surprise. I mean, this conversation has been going on for 2 weeks as to allowing relief materials to pass through that corridor, establishing a humanitarian corridor for provision of medical supplies, food, and also being able to pass on medical aid and equipment. So it was necessarily going to happen. We have to guarantee safety of personnel, of people, and also of service persons who intend to provide humanitarian services along the corridor. You recollect that sometime 2 weeks ago, this clamor had been there, and the pressure was on Israel to allow this to happen. But Israel then stated that it wasn't going to allow Hamas, the militia, if you like, the Hamas to gain any advantage or to be to have the benefit of being treated for medical services. So this was expected. It's a good thing to see Israel coming to the table and assuring that we could have a temporary ceasefire. The conditions for that and then the enforcement of that, a different kettle of fish altogether. So my own thoughts are that except we are able to account for this and then also enforce it, there has to be a neutral third party that would enforce and would hold both parties accountable to this truce. If we don't have that, then there's at least then it's on paper. It's not realistic at the moment.
Well, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says, in his words, Israel was winning and would continue the war until it achieved complete victory. How do you see this comment in light of calls for ceasefire and pauses regarding Israel's future military plans and really the objectives in the conflict?
So the last time that I got to be able to speak, I said that there are these two objectives that Israel is pursuing, and that is to maintain its territorial integrity, what they call its own territorial integrity, and then, of course, its right, perceived right to be able to have reprisal attacks on Hamas. And there's nobody holding Israel to account to say, this is thus far you can go. There are different reactions from all over the world. Some people call it genocide and all of that. But we don't have the international agencies to say to Israel, this is how we are going to get ourselves out of this crisis. Okay, the first part of things is that Hamas invaded Israel and then caused a massacre. That was what it was, okay? But nobody at this point is saying, you know, for what Hamas have done, this is the right, if you like, implications of that without leaving it in the hands of Israel. So as it is at this moment, it's just Israel going headlong into this, bearing arms, and then nobody is able to even call Israel to order to say there has to be a method to what you are trying to do. Now, my personal fear about the war against, if you like, unwarranted attacks or terrorism is that at that point we suspend every other conventions or treaties that may be at play. If Israel is saying that it's going into Gaza and all of that, who is Israel looking for? Are we looking for those who committed those crimes, or we just want to invade Gaza with the Hamas at the casualties of vulnerable persons, of children, of women who had nothing to do with what this supposed Hamas militia did? So there has to be a method of doing this to ensure that we don't increase casualties. However, at this point, there's nothing stopping Israel from just going on a full-scale attack and almost doing the exact thing that the Hamas did on Israel. So there has to be a way to be able to say, we are going out there, this is a military operation against armed men, not against the vulnerable. However, we can't see this at play in the ongoing conflict.
And Yinka, how would you assess the ground operations that have been on for weeks now? According to the IDF, it's uncovered several tunnels. I mean, are they really gaining headway? We're also learning that the director of Gaza City's largest hospital, Al Shifa, is being held by Israeli security services.
That's the only legitimacy we can see to it, and we have to hold on to it as well. Because whereas the Hamas spokesperson said, you're not going to find anything, you are just going against vulnerable persons. But Israel has been able to show with hard evidence that there are hotspots along the corridor, which shows a total falsehood of what Hamas claims is happening. So there's a demilitarization going on by Israel, and it is justifiable because the Hamas didn't wake up one day to just launch these attacks on Israel. It took years of planning. There would be many more tunnels uncovered, possibly many more arms and ammunition uncovered in the process. However, it is beginning to look like a cleansing by Israel. So until we leave this in the hands of the United Nations, NATO, we will keep uncovering, all right, several tunnels, cache, arms dump, and all of that. At the behest of Hamas, we will uncover them, but there has to be some control towards this demilitarization, which is what I think Israel is conducting. It just wants to bring Hamas to its knees, but there would be casualties, so there would be many more of this. It would have been different, for example, even though the United States, for example, did not have any justification for invading Iraq. Although they said they were looking for biological weapons, okay? So if Israel on this, in this instance is saying that, there are arms and ammunition in the hands of civilians who have done these terrorist activities against us, and we welcome international community to help to demilitarize, it will be a different kettle of fish entirely. So yes, Israel will keep on covering these dangerous sites to its own integrity, to its own people, to its own citizens, but it is more or less Israel just taking the case in its own arms, rightly so, to protect its own integrity, but it is susceptible to abuse. So at the end of the day, you start wondering, all right, on one hand, Israel is right to be able to unravel whatever dangers that the Hamas poses, but Israel may be going about it in a way that leaves nothing to account at all.
Yinka, my last question to you. UNICEF's executive director mentioned that Gaza is the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. What specific concerns or impacts would this have on the children going forward post-war?
Hardly surprising. Hardly surprising. It's what I woke up to today. Personally, it's what I discussed with my children. It's unfortunate, okay, for children who were living normal lives, of vulnerable targets, okay, who were living normal lives before this war started. They did not call for this war. I read somewhere today that over 28 premature children were born in this conflict, and Israel is trying to mop up. There's a lasting trauma in the minds of those children. I shudder at what happens to the mental health of these children. What are they carrying forward as what they know of life? Suddenly, they woke up 4 weeks ago and life is no longer normal. And I dare say that regardless, I don't see this unilateral attack by Israel being the solution, because it won't bring a lasting solution to this problem. Those children who have experienced trauma, would themselves, the likelihood of them becoming terrorists in the future is on a high. So it is important that we start to speak for the children so that we can have a lasting end to this conflict, because we are building a childhood of trauma for these children, and this will be the only thing they know going into the future. So it is time for the United Nations, for UNICEF to say, we need to evacuate these children, and nothing must stop us from evacuating these children to a near normal life as we start to wind down this scale of terror that we have seen over the last 1 month. Somebody has to speak for the children. Somebody has to speak for the mothers, for the women and vulnerable persons, including the physically challenged people who are unfortunate to be in Gaza at this time.
Yinka Oyeniji, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
British Foreign Secretary David Cameron has visited Kibbutz Be'eri in southern Israel. Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen can be seen with Mr. Cameron and his aides. The British Foreign Minister is expected to visit one of the scenes of October 7th attack, as well as meet Israeli and Palestinian leaders. More than 100 residents of Be'eri, that's 10% of the village population, were killed in that attack.
I will never forget, and it's important. Today is also a day where we hope to see this humanitarian pause. I wanted to come here myself to see the horrific nature of the attacks that you suffered on October the 7th, and they are absolutely horrific. I mean, the terrorism, parents shot in front of their children, children shot in front of their parents. I've heard things and seen things that obviously I will never forget, and it's important we understand that. Today is also a day where we hope to see this humanitarian pause. I think that's important because it's an opportunity to get hostages out and to get aid in, and I hope and would urge everyone who's involved in that agreement to make sure that it happens. I think it is important. For the rest of the day, I've got meetings with Israeli politicians. I'm going to be meeting with hostage families and discussing all of these issues of war, and hopefully there'll be other opportunities to talk to the press. But thank you for letting me come here.
The commander of the Houthi Navy has toured the commercial cargo ship, Galaxy Leader, which it seized in the Red Sea. Brigadier General Mohammed Abdel Nabi said his forces would stand ready to attack any Israeli ship crossing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the south of the Red Sea. The Iran-backed Houthis, who have been sending drones and long-range missiles at Israel in solidarity with Hamas, seized the Galaxy Leader cargo ship on Sunday in the southern Red Sea. As the hour for the release of Israeli hostages from Gaza approaches, one mother is caught between optimism and despair. While she hopes to see her two children return, Hadas Khaldaran knows her husband is unlikely to be freed at this stage of the deal between Hamas and Israel. Her two children, 16-year-old Sahar and 12-year-old Erez, were kidnapped from their home in kibbutz near Oz on October 7, together with her 53-year-old husband, Ofer. Her mother was killed in the attack, along with a cousin of her children. Israel said the deal would see the release of 50 women and children by Islamist group Hamas over 4 days at a rate of at least 10 daily. No arrangement was secured for the return of the other 190 hostages, Israelis and foreign nationals believed to be held by Hamas and other militant groups in Gaza.
No information. I'm very nervous and frustrated, and I'm waiting for news. I want just good news. I don't want any bad news anymore. I just want to hug my children, to kiss them, to protect them, to promise them that it will never happen again. That's all I want. I don't care about nothing, because my life is being broken apart. My life won't be ever again the same again, and their life won't be the same. They probably need their time to get healed. Probably they're going to be in hospital for a while to get power and heal and to get you know, to return to be normal. My fight didn't finish. I have to. If he wants, I hope he will release, but if not, I still have to fight for him and for all the others. But it will give me, you know, if I can meet and receive my children back to my arms, it will give me much more power, because now I'm in hell. I'm in the dark, because my family was broken apart. Some of them murder, some of them kidnap. It's a hell. So it will give me power, of course.
As efforts remain underway for the Israeli government to free the roughly 240 hostages kidnapped and held by the Palestinian group Hamas, A child psychologist says she is torn between sadness and her desire to help the child hostages recover. According to Israeli media and the Israeli government, up to 40 hostages being held are children, including a 10-month-old baby and preschoolers. Dr. Daphne Dolberg, a clinical and developmental psychologist and faculty at the Academic College of Tel Aviv-Yafo, has been practicing for 30 years and in the past 10 years has focused on trauma-focused parent-child psychotherapy. She says part of the tragedy is not knowing the full extent of the trauma unfolding for the hostages. She conceded many hostages are likely to return with symptoms showing post-traumatic stress disorder. Recovery is possible, she says, but will require processing and support, adding that it will be impossible to forget the events.
Part of the tragedy in this case is that we don't know yet and will have probably only limited information about what they went through. So thinking about very young children, either with their parents or separated from the parents, we don't know who is with them, and we don't know about the physical environment in which they are being captive, is horrible. The children have been going through a long, horrifying trauma, and so they will probably show signs of post-trauma, which means that some of them will be very fidgety, very frightened. Some may be very angry, some may be hyperactive, some may respond with a very heightened emotional responses, whereas others will be with a very blunted affect. Some may want to sleep all the time, some may not be able to sleep at all because of nightmares and night terrors. Some may not eat. We see that many times after trauma. Some eat a lot in order to comfort themselves. Recovering from trauma means not forgetting the trauma, because such events cannot be forgotten. But if there is enough processing and support, then we hope that the frightening events will be stored in a way that the child can remember them, but not being controlled by them or not being overflooded by them. This is our hope. And with many children have the advantage of their brain and experiences still being very flexible. So there is good chances for recovery, but it will never be a full recovery, and it would never be that whatever happened to them would not affect them or be forgotten. This is impossible.